G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far that you've had a fantastic weekend. I know it is a Sunday leading into the working week, but I hope it's been as enjoyable as it can be. Now Lily and I, we got away for 2 nights. We just went down the coast for some much needed downtime and to take a day off. We both work very long and sometimes very hectic hours. So look, we really enjoyed that time off, but I can't wait to get back into it. And of course, as always, we have a lot to go over, and tensions between President Trump and Zelensky, of course, they continue to soar. And I'll be very interested to see how and when this comes to a head. So on that, we're going to talk about critical minerals, of course, what Trump wants, what Zelensky has countered there. We'll talk about Starlink, but then I want to talk about sovereignty and some of the issues that this war has now made for Europe around then independence, sovereignty, self-sufficiency, and then I want to talk some politics, how that relates and how we are seeing this divide between maybe your progressive, conservative, traditionalist, postmodernist, and they all can be interchangeable, at least some of those, in certain societies. So we'll go over all of that. I want to show you the maps, and I want to talk quickly about, of course, the election taking place in Germany today, or whenever you're seeing this around that time. And that could absolutely change the trajectory of Europe and this war as well. Look, we haven't looked at the maps for a couple of days, so let's have a look at the maps. Now, regarding maps and movements, this is something I've seen floating around all the pages and Twitter and Telegram and all of this. And I want to give a little bit of context to this, because this is, what do I say? Propaganda is the truth, but explained in a way that fits your narrative. And I think this is a fairly good example of this. This comes from the Institute Study of War, a highly trusted then think tank exclusively about this war. And in this, they talk about the amount that Russia is currently occupying, okay? At the current rate of advance, it would take Russian forces 83 years to capture the remaining 80%. Now, this is true at the current rate of advance. This is where I come into that propaganda piece. It is the truth, but changed into a way to fit your narrative. Where we need to step a step further on this is go, no, war is not linear. It doesn't work like that. Attritional warfare, like bankruptcy, is little by little, then all at once. You can look at many historical examples of this, or even better, you can just use, I guess, the frontal lobe and think, how is this going to go in attritional war? Eventually there has to be a breaking point somewhere, economically, militarily, one way or the other, but it doesn't go at just a linear rate. And they've spoken about this. Russia's rate of advance to the front line has slowed significantly over the past 3 months. That is correct. But I don't think the ISW understand winter in this as well. Russian forces advanced average of almost 28 square kilometres per day in November, 18 in December, 16 in January. Again, what has occurred in these months? It has cooled right down. It's the end of major campaigns. So again, with all of this, it's taking truths and change them into then a narrative. And you can't take either that go, well, January 24, January 25, Russia advanced 10 times more between those 2 dates. So you could interpret that data. The way you interpret data is just as important, if not more, to a narrative than the data itself. So you go, well, January 24, January 25, there was 10 times the increases. So will we see that in February? No, we're not on path to see that, but as well, it's how you interpret the data and can change that. So, of course, on this map, you have Ukraine in the centre of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, purple since 2014. The red check that you're going to look at, this is areas where Russia has advanced over the past 24 hours. Now, the first area we're going to come down to is the now closed up Kursk pocket. And we have, of course, this movement through Ulucky just on this outskirts right here. We did see a Russian flag go up, so we can confirm this. And yesterday, this was the deep state map update in here. So from Shevchenko down to Ulucky, that the remainder of this pocket, or almost the remainder, had closed up, and then today we see movement through Ulaki. I think it is likely that Ulaki north to Andrivkia is all closed up. Let's look then at the Suryak maps, and he shows this. This tends to make more sense in how this would look as per grey zone on this. So Ulaki has come under occupation according to Suryak, the north of it, as well as movements into Constantinople and further movements on the western side. So we can definitely see some changes around on this front line, and we need to just add a bit of common sense onto how this may look as well, given where the changes have taken place. And then let's move down into the south. So we're moving west of here. We'll look at now Velyka Novosilka. Now what we can see is further northern movements in the direction of Bulatsky. And we can also see, of course, where Russia had moved up to Skudny. There was geolocation confirming the northernmost extreme of this as well. But as per the maps show it, we don't need to show it for that. Remember, the reason we show footage, I'm not interested at all in the death and destruction that we see. Sadly, a lot of other bloggers, YouTubers, Telegrammers, Twitter users, and just people tend to almost get like off on that. I hate that. I hate that this is all going on, and the destruction of people's lives, families, everything that is occurring. But we use it for either tactical advances or a strategic element coming into the battlefield. So let's have a look at this. This is our first Suryak map of Velyka Novosilka. So Russian army took full control over this area in here, which I will not pronounce, but this is right in here. So expansion then over the Nokryali, and then we have then a second update in here that shows this northern push towards here too. So we can confirm both of those movements are taking place. Now, like I showed you and was saying, I show things because it may indicate something coming. So we'll come down into the south. This is Orkiv, this is Robotny, areas you are familiar with. Kamyansky, Stepove in here, and I hope the boys at Stepnogorsk fire station are doing well. I had the pleasure of meeting them and dropping off a lot of tools to those guys as well, critical rescue tools due to the bombing that can occur around these areas. But this is what we have seen here. So we have this paddock on a diagonal heading up in here, and just on a tree line here, we see in the footage I'm about to show you a Fab 3000 being dropped here. Now, at least myself, I have not seen a Fab 3000 used on this front line before. And there are a lot of claims coming out and rumours over the past, say week, that Russia is planning new assaults in this direction. So we will continue to monitor this. If we see an increase in strategic or tactical weapons, so strategic Iskanders, tactical Fabs, artillery, if we see an increase in that, it may tell us what's coming. Remember, there's almost this paint by numbers. And why isn't this changed? Because obviously it's working of Fabs, well, Iskanders and Fabs being used, then longer range, then TOS, then movements through. So just keep an eye out on this, and that footage of which we are showing you how then we got that geolocation is, let me mute this here, this Fab bomb then landing there. Now, personally, I actually doubt if it is a 3000. That's what claimed. I think it potentially is a 1500, but it does look like there maybe was secondaries, or it has hit something under the ground as per these other clouds raising up on separate areas. So again, we'll just keep an eye out down in the south, and what we talk about, because when we say there's been some rumours of it, sometimes it turns out to be true. There's a lot of people saying, excuse me, Russia's going to try another cross onto the right bank of Kherson. Now, why would this be dangerous? Well, of course, you're crossing a waterway, an obstacle, in highly dangerous in a drone warfare attritional environment. Why, though, could it have large benefit? Well, if Russia can get some sort of foothold on this side, that would play massively into negotiations coming forward, especially with the position Mr. Donald Trump and then Vice President J.D. Vance have taken. So we will see about this. And of course, we have seen that Russia has been able to make bridgeheads recently, especially in the northeast, due to the manpower shortages that Ukraine is facing currently. So let's move our way up, and then we'll come into Pokrovsk. Now, no changes shown on this map now for a couple of days, but let's have a look at our first map in here. So this is around what we call the Zaporizhia front, Yasnove front. So if we zoom just in one, we're talking that basically these two prongs have closed up through here, according to Suryak, and for the south of Yasnove, which is this red dot, that has closed up down to the south. And then we have one more map in here. So Suryak, again, he's showing out from this area in here that the Russians are moving out to the northwest. They're also saying that the Russian army begin re-entering Lysivkia. So remember, Lysivkia up here is where Ukraine has had successful counter pushes in here and taken back some areas in Bashani and Lysivkia as well. So Surak is saying that the Russians have re-entered these areas. Remember, the front line can be highly, highly liquid in many, many different areas. Let's move our way up, and we're looking for then Terny, or realistically the north of here, at this Nova Lubivkia, of course, to the west of Nevsky. Now, what has been reported is that the Russians have successfully crossed the Zedebets River onto the western side of here. Many maps are confirming this. Now, what we're looking for can be a little bit difficult, but this red dot is Nevsky, this red dot is the Nova Lubivkia, and the Russian army captured completely this locality, at least according to Syriac maps. Now, last time we spoke about the Russians then retaking Sverdlikovo, which was confirmed, of course, across the maps, but we also said that a lot of maps and a lot of pages are saying the Russians not only then captured this, they also have actually crossed into Sumy, which is the worst case scenario for Kursk, is that the Russian forces, they build up enough forces into here that they force a withdrawal or then close up this by force, and then because they've got 10, 20, 30, claimed 50 or 60,000 troops in here, they remain there, and then they cross into Sumy. Let's have a look at this on the first Syriac map update we have in here. So where we are looking for. So this is Sverdlikovo. This, of course, is Ukraine's Sumy Oblast, and you can see the best way to look is just the shape of the front line, and this is this sector down in here. So from this Zurivka, which is right in here, that it's showing that the Russians have pushed to the border in some areas, and that they have developed operations inside of Sumy Oblast. So keep an eye out for that and see if we get any geolocations or any other map confirmations also. So the second map update in here, so it shows the Russians have just pushed to the border, but then pushing northeast at a Sverdlikovo into, I can't remember what this area is called in here, re-entered this locality, the Labadivkia in here as well as on the eastern side that the Russians have taken back some amount of ground too. So we need to go to Ulanok. We see this road turn up, so just in this sector where my cursor is at the moment. So definitely keep an eye on this. Of course, like I say, you're going to see a lot of misinformation, disinformation, or just the definition of propaganda, which is truthful information but presented in a way. And you can present that it's going to take 100 years to take back an area because there's been very little movement. You could go today, there's been 5 square kilometre change, therefore it's going to be 300 years until the Russians reach Kyiv. And that is truthful of if it remains the same factor, but a linear attritional warfare, you cannot just presume that it is linear, okay? Because otherwise you could have taken at times when Ukraine has had an advancement in Suja and gone, okay, in 3 days' time, the Ukrainians will be in Moscow, okay? So you could make that a fact off a 24-hour period, but we need to look very, very long term. And I'll show you over the next coming months the changes that we see. Compare that to the month prior and the month as well as last year. So let's talk about critical minerals, sovereignty, and Starlink. Now, Elon Musk, he has said that this is not true in a post on his X, Telegram, Twitter, whatever it's called. Now, Musk posted that this article was false and that Reuters was lying. And what Reuters does report is that the US could cut Ukraine's access to Starlink. US negotiators pressing on key access to Ukraine's critical minerals have raised the possibility of cutting countries' access to Starlink unless they basically go through with these critical minerals. Now, this is from sources that Reuters and AP have as they're both reporting on this, but if they do not reach a deal, we'll see shut off imminently. Again, we don't really know what a source has said here. Ukraine runs on Starlink. They consider it their North Star. Losing Starlink would be a massive blow. And it wouldn't be a massive blow. It would be catastrophic. Or most of the drones run off Starlink because Ukraine has gone one way instead of the fiber optic. They've gone more of a machine learning way more than fiber optic. So that instantly is just gone, as well as a dramatic amount of communications are through encrypted apps, not over encrypted radios. It would be absolutely catastrophic. Musk said it is not true. But one thing we do know is this is a further lever in the leverage that Mr. Donald Trump has over Ukraine. Now, you might not like it or not, but at the end of the day, Trump is holding all of the cards. US President Donald Trump is very confident that he'll reach a deal to end Russia's war against Ukraine, possibly as early as this week. And this is coming from the White House Press Secretary, Caroline Leavitt. So, of course, we saw that critical minerals go through. It was rejected by Kyiv, and we're looking at maybe another critical minerals deal at the moment, presented and then negotiated. The president and his team are very much focused on continuing negotiations with both sides in this war to end the conflict. The president is very confident we can get it done this week, so we will see. Then, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz says working around the clock all weekend to get a deal to end the conflict in Ukraine. So there's a couple of moving parts in this. Of course, there's the talking to Russia to see where they would end the war. There's talking to Ukraine to see where they'd end the war. And then the critical minerals, of course, where Trump wants to have some of that US taxpayer money come back. He believes very strongly that Russia is willing to make a deal. The president said he wants the killing to stop. He wants to stop seeing innocent men die, and that he wants peace. Now, in this, it says Ukraine was not invited to participate in the Saudi Arabia discussions. Again, this is not surprising, I don't believe, to anyone. And at the end of the day, it's one of these things where it's like, well, should have Ukraine actually been invited? Now, if it is a peace negotiation, of course, I believe yes, but this wasn't. What this discussion was, this was a discussion with Russia to see if they were actually serious about ending the war. So, of course, that's a bilateral discussion. But also, where Ukraine, they'll say and they'll complain they weren't invited, Ukraine literally has laws that say that they cannot participate in negotiations or talks. So I can see why the US and Russia at this point would go, well, you can't come if that law's still in place, because anything which you decide you can go back and say it was then illegitimate and against the law, whoever you send to participate in this. Earlier in the day, Trump claimed the US and Ukraine were pretty close to a deal regarding Ukraine's critical natural resources. Of course, Zelensky rejected that initial proposal. Of course, there's been a new proposal seen by the New York Times that provides no specific security guarantees for Kyiv, but in exchange for 50% of the revenues from Ukraine's natural resources instead of that $500 billion cap, which many say is significantly worse. Trump says, I want them to give us something for all the money we've put in. We're asking for rare earths, oil, anything we can get. Again, the spokesperson has said this is an important piece for the president. It's very important for the president because it will recoup American tax dollars, and also will be a great economic partnership within the US and the Ukrainian people as well. They rebuild their country following this brutal war. Now, it is being reported more loosely that Zelensky has actually pushed back on another proposal in this, that Ukraine has submitted new proposals to the US regarding mineral rights. Of course, but through Keith Kellogg, the US then representative in Kyiv at the moment. The Ukrainian side proposed to reduce the size of the future fund. That the US proposed the fund at $500 billion, and Ukraine has put it back and reduced it to $100 billion and handed it over to Mr. Kellogg. Now, again, you need to look at things about what's right, but look at what is realistic. And sometimes those are very different. This war is one of them. What is right, what is realistic may be very, very different, but I think a lot of people struggle to actually differentiate between those. There's some obvious issues in here. Trump, United States, they are negotiating in a complete position of power. From Starlink to aid to protection to LNG to everything. Trump will probably ask, why would I come down to a fifth of what I presented? Eventually, Ukraine will have to buckle. Now, you can call it politics, extortion, payback, whatever side of the aisle you're on. I'm fine with you being on that. But it doesn't change the fact that the US, they hold all of the cards here, and the amount of leverage they have is extreme, which is a real problem in actually getting this one way or another that Ukraine will see as fair. Is the US can just lean, especially now with US LNG, then there is a further reliance on the United States. Now, I believe we may find a happy medium here is the absolute minimum I think Trump would go for is at least what he has stated that the US has spent. He states and he believes the US has spent $350 billion. So I think the minimum for him to agree with, I think that would be his minimum. I can't see him going below that. He believes it's 350. If Ukraine believe it's 100 billion and Ukraine presented it, at the end of the day, Trump, with the leverage and the power that he has, being the leader of the most powerful country on the earth, and of course, that has a lot of power over Europe, over Ukraine, both from military, energy, and of course that growing, again, we will see. And this is something I presented to you a while back, and I want to present it again. In order to be a truly sovereign state, one must either be completely self-sufficient or alternatively approximately balanced independence between competing factions in the following key areas. So if you want to be sovereign, you either have to be completely self-sufficient, which is why America is such a power, or have a really healthy balance so no one party can have huge leverage on you. And what you have to then have some balance in or sovereignty over is your economic trade, your defense, and your energy. And of course, this gets weighted in Europe very, very heavily US-based. What we've spoken about before is India. That India have, at least for his knowledge, the best sovereignty through diversity or neutrality approach. So of course, they buy energy from everywhere. But India, they also last week, the week before, signed a deal for Russian anti-ship missiles, and being reported last week that they're going to go with the F-35. So what you can see that I'm getting at is no matter where tides are changing, well, they have sort of put some chips in on Russia-China, some chips in on the West, and no single party can have so much then leverage. The argument that Europeans should cut off Russian oil to increase sovereignty, additionally and equally importantly, have simultaneously decided to levy every sanction under the sun against on Russia to cut off trade with them. So setting aside any ideological or moral argument, again, what's right and realistic may be different. One might wish to do these things. If we only consider the issue of sovereignty, what have we really accomplished? And what he has said is this argument that by cutting off this, we've become more sovereign, he does not agree with, even if he agrees with cutting it off may have been the right choice ideologically or then morally. Again, let's have a look at this. Europe has now removed access to Russian energy, replaced a significant portion then with American energy, okay? Reduced trade with Russia, increased trade with America. Increasing then America's influence, again, so increasing on that trade and, of course, to the energy to America. Europe has been long dependent on the US for defense, and this now completes the clean sweep of all three pillars. Remember, the three pillars, you either need self-sufficiency on equal balance, economic trade, defense, and energy. Europe is heavily on the US side. So I'd argue Europe has maneuvered itself into a position of being a complete vassal state for the US with either significant or complete dependence on the US in all three realms. They are now at the mercy of whatever policy decisions emerge from Washington. Again, it doesn't have to be right to be then realistic. And this is what I'd say to Ukraine about then this minerals thing. Ukraine is very, very dependent on America for energy, intelligence, military, name it, it's there. Energy, defense, economic trade, name it, it's there. That is the problem. Because it's now so sufficient, or because it's now so reliant on that, self-sufficiency has removed. Some of your sovereign decisions have now been swayed by that. So it's going to run into a lot of problems. And he talks about in Denmark here, they are literally at the mercy of how aggressive Trump wants to be over, of course, Greenland. Because, well, what they can do is they can just start leaning on tariffs, energy, SWIFT, markets, F-35 military programs, of course, these three pillars of which we speak about. And that this has been manoeuvred into play not by just America, but also by Russia then invading into Ukraine. And we're going to talk more about Russian and American relationship too. And of course, what I said in the beginning was that Trump and Zelensky's relationship, this is deteriorated to the point, I believe, probably of no return, although Zelensky does want to meet next week. It'll be interesting to see how this actually becomes. Trump on Friday said he doesn't consider it essential for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to be present at negotiations aimed at ending Russia's war in Ukraine. I don't think he's very important to be in meetings. He's been there for 3 years. He makes it very hard to make a deal. And again, America wants to make a deal. And what I've said with where America see competing interests around the world, America will see, I believe, at least Trump, in his calculus, that his calculus of foregoing Ukraine's NATO membership and 20% of land is worth to him at least what he can pull from minerals or moving Russia away from China's growing dominance as well. Later, the president added that Ukrainian leaders don't have any cards in the talks. I've had very good talks with Putin, and I've had not such good talks with Ukraine. They don't have any cards, but they play it tough. But we're not going to let this continue. Of course, you can see the language being used in here and where relationships may be getting strained and where the future of this may be heading. Kiev and Europe have complained of being sidelined after Trump. But one thing is, I'll say Kiev and Europe, they are not open to peace discussions that would end the war tomorrow. that are realistic. NATO membership is not on the table. And Europe can say this all they want, but at the end of the day, France, Germany, they can move troops and they can move more equipment in, but that's rhetoric. They're not actually doing it, and they have not shown that they are prepared to do it. And NATO or the EU as a whole, that not everyone there is on board with Ukraine entering into this. So if there needs to be an end in a week, in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, there's going to have to be concessions, and relationships and all this is very important, and cards on the table, of course, are important. Tension with Kyiv soared. Further, the Republican president branded Zelensky a dictator and falsely claimed Ukraine had started the war. He complains that he's not in a meeting that we're having with Saudi Arabia trying to intermediate peace. Trump said in his interview on Friday, he's been in a meeting for 3 years and nothing got done. So he's saying Zelensky, he's been in there for 3 years, nothing's got done, people are still dying, and I'll do whatever it takes to end this, even if it means growing further apart from Europe and America. But of course, what we just spoke about was Europe with sanctions against Russia, with cutting off energy and whatever, that its sovereignty now is then more reliant on America due to things like energy and trade. So again, it can be a very difficult of where America continues to have a lot more leverage. And this is something I presented last week, and I've just blurred out some of this, that we need to talk about. Trump and Zelensky's relationship is strained. Trump and Europe's relationship is strained. And they've said that the Republican Party's values, they do not have the same shared democratic values that they see in Europe. And what we've seen is, in my opinion, we've seen the EU grow further liberal, left, progressive, postmodern. We've seen the US move more, I'd prefer to use the term traditionalist. I think that sums it up better, and traditionalist is an advocate of maintaining tradition, especially so as resist to change. What we see is Putin over the past 3 years, or at least since we've been focusing on this, he has been putting a lot of energy into saying that Russia is a bastion of traditionalist values away from his quote he calls the satanic West. Now, what I get at in this is, could we see that Trump's traditionalist conservative values can eventually line up closer with Russia's, or America moving in that direction? Could we see that this gap grows between where maybe the more progressive Europe is and where maybe the more conservative American goes? I'm not saying kumbaya around the campfire, but I'm meaning as far as then further maybe trade relations or whatever we would see. Could we see a change in that? Now, of course, America will criticise Russia with freedom of elections, freedom of press and speech, which of all things America hold very, very dearly. Although, the further left and the further right you go, the closer those actually then become. I am a big believer in the horseshoe theory. But this is all things that the Republicans, Vice President J.D. Vance, has criticised Europe of abandoning as well. Criticised Europe, especially in Romania, of then taking away the freedom of elections through Kalin Georgescu, freedom of press, freedom of speech, especially if we're talking the UK. We know that has then fallen out compared to what it should and used to be. So what will we see? Could we see movement one way or another? And I'm going to show you some believe that this is that. Now, I don't believe that. I think America will just stay on their own path. They are powerful enough to be able to do that and self-sufficient enough to be able to do that. Russia may come into the orbit more of China. Europe may get their own shit together, but whenever was all of Europe all on the same side, even against Nazi Germany? That wasn't there as well. So again, we will see. I'll go more into that. But could we see the Russia move east in relationships on current trajectories? Where do you see Trump? Do you think he has a close relationship with Putin or Zelensky? Where do you think their values lie? That's what I'm more sharing with you. So I'm not talking short-term, I'm talking decades, but things could move very, very quickly. I'm not the ISW who believes in linear then projections. And this is a good example of how many people are feeling. Of course, fellow YouTuber Zach Bro says this: these are the current teams, democracies versus dictatorships. Who will you fight for the light and for the darkness? So, of course, on the democratic side, he's got Ukraine, the EU, and the UK. And then on the dictator side, he's got Russia, China, and America. Now, America is definitely not on the dictator side. Mr. Bro, you literally 2 months ago would have voted in an election for the leader of your country. But has America voted in and elected a more traditionalist conservative government. Yes, that is true. And I believe that this is very foreign to many and believe that that is a dictatorship. It's not. It's elected. This is the thing. Democracy works great until the person that you like doesn't get voted in, and then you'll either say that they are a communist or that they are a dictator. And there'd be people on the same side if Kamala Harris was in saying that, well, there's a Marxist or a communist in. So democracy works when you have to sort of accept that it doesn't go the way you want it to go either way. But to say America is a dictatorship, I think is ridiculous. But again, side note on this though, militarily, if this is the makeup, and Mr. Broch know this, he was a strategic missile officer or something within the American nuclear armament. I from memory, I could be incorrect. Apologies on that. But militarily, this would last all of about 10 minutes, and that's factoring in launch times. The most important factors for attritional protracted war, especially when we have great powers engaged in this, is industrial and economic capacity, manpower, mobilisation, logistics, supply lines, strategic depth, alliances, technological and tactical adaptation. And now, in this, there is not a singular superpower. In this, there's 2.5. There's 3 nuclear superpowers. There's 2.5 superpowers. And China, as far as economically, manpower, strategic depth, and further alliances. And realistically, I think Australia would side with the US, and I believe Canada would in a war if this became. Now, this isn't going to become, but you can put things on either side of this aisle. You can claim there's places in this that are not democratic as well. But what I want to touch on is something a little bit further on in this, is the world was split in much of the 20th century between capitalist West, socialist East. Of course, we know who won in that. But we do hear Xi Jinping, Putin, and others talk about a multipolar world. And in Alexander Dugin's book, The Theory of a Multipolar World, he talks about, poles growing, that you'll have their own civilizations, he calls them, rather than sovereign states. But he doesn't go to explain what may be these civilizations. He said that is something that he cannot predict. But could we see a multipolar world evolve, and we would see a progressive nuclear Europe and a traditionalist Northern Hemisphere giants? Now, I have coined this term in here. I don't know what else to call it, but could we see something like that as 2 poles, that we have progressives and traditionalists? Could we see that down the line? Now, I don't know. I'm off in the weeds here somewhere, but that is what we are to do here. We're to speak about theories and what may occur short-term and long-term down the track. Again, we will see. It's a very interesting thing to try and pin that America is somehow then on this side of China and Russia. I do not believe that. I think Trump has come in and goes, we need to do what is the best for America. Maybe not what's best for Europe or best for anyone else or the best for Ukraine, but what is the best for America? Okay, America's biggest threat, their biggest threat is China, who solve a lot of issues for that. Russia do, and China, of course, they're building more weapons, and America's sending all these weapons into Ukraine. And I believe that Mr. President Trump's calculus is, I'm prepared to fuck over half of this, whether you call it betrayal and extortion. I'm happy to do that for the sake of America moving forward and trying to maintain global hegemony, or at least equal dominance, as the 20th century was the fight between, ideology as far as capitalism, fascism, communism. The 21st century will be the fight between who is then a unipolar power, or could we maintain America at least as an equal pole? We will see. So let's talk about what may happen over the next 24 hours, and this could change a lot. Watch this space. This could change the entire political sphere of Europe, and especially this war in Ukraine that is occurring. Of course, the German elections. Now, Olaf Scholz and his Social Democratic Party, they are about to get fucking crushed at the wazoo. And we do know there's a more conservative movement in Germany, which is not surprising at all, seeing, at least from the outside looking in, what is happening in Europe. Of course, we're going to see similar in Australia as well. Now, it's looking like the Christian Democratic Union, the CDU, will win, but AfD from polls, they are growing in support. And of course, actually, I'll talk more about AFD getting pushed as well online in a second. Now, the CDU, they want strong support for the EU and Ukraine. And recently, the leader of the CDU, who became the chancellor, has said about Trump's comments about Ukraine, this is the Russian narrative. This is how Putin has framed it for years. And honestly, I'm shocked that Donald Trump has now apparently adopted it himself. So he is claiming as well that Trump has fallen into the Russian information or disinformation sphere. Now, Elon Musk, he has been pushing very, very hard on the AFD party in Germany. Now, I think if AFD were to win, now it's not looking like they will, but I don't know, but they will get more power as seats in the government and all of this. I'm not a bloody, I don't know everything about German politics, but I think if they were to win, I think we would see the EU do what I'm calling Kalingeorgescu and instantly say, no, that election isn't legit as foreign outside influence from Mr. Musk and unfair pushing on Twitter or X. Now, this is going to be, hopefully I don't get quoted on this, but every time I've been refreshing Twitter today or X, that post has actually been at the very top. Of course, Elon owns it. Now, I don't know if that's just my X stuffs up all the time. I don't know, but again, we may see. Legends, I'm glad to be back. Lou, you look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.